The intake form had a field for species. It was the 8th line, just below hair color and just above estimated age, if unknown asterisk, and it had clearly been added as an afterthought. The font was slightly smaller than the rest, and the line beneath it was too narrow for anything longer than a single word. Whoever had typed the form had not anticipated Verath Kelm, subclassification IV, ossified integument, non-mammalian thermal regulation. The woman behind the desk at the Halcyon Bridge Children's Home looked at the form. She looked at the child sitting in the plastic chair across from her. She looked at the form again. "I'll just write other asterisk," she said, more to herself than to anyone. The child said nothing. She had not said anything since the transit officer had walked her through the front door 40 minutes ago, signed a paper, and left. She sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, and she was very, very still. Her name, according to the file the transit officer had left, was Sora. She was approximately 7 years old. Verathkeln children developed more slowly than humans in some ways and faster in others, and the colony physician who had written the estimate had noted this in careful, apologetic parentheses. Her skin was a deep, warm amber, almost copper in the overhead light, with a faint iridescence along the ridge of her cheekbones and the backs of her hands, like a fish scale catching sunlight at an angle. Her eyes were large and dark, with a second inner eyelid that she blinked occasionally in a slow, lateral slide that the staff found unsettling. Her ears were low-set and slightly elongated, tipped with a small point of cartilage, and she had 4 fingers on each hand instead of 5. She was wearing a yellow shirt that was 2 sizes too large. Someone had tied the excess fabric at the side with a rubber band to keep it from swallowing her. The woman behind the desk, whose name was Coordinator Harwick, clipped the form to a board and stood up. "I'll show you to your room," she said, in the careful, slightly louder voice that people sometimes used when they were not certain they were being understood. "You'll be with the Fortwaits. We have a good group right now. You'll like it." Sora stood up. She followed Coordinator Harwick down the hall. She did not say that she would like it. She didn't. Not because the children were unkind. Most of them weren't. But children notice difference before they have language for it, and Sora was different in ways that were immediately, unavoidably visible. Her second eyelid, the copper-amber iridescence of her skin, the way she didn't shiver in the morning when the heating system lagged, because Verathkeln bodies ran warm by human standards, banking heat internally and releasing it slowly through the iridescent patches at their cheekbones and knuckles. The way she ate, methodically, in a specific order, protein before starch before anything sweet, because her digestive system was optimized for that sequence, and scrambling it made her feel ill. The children weren't unkind. They were curious, and then they lost interest, and then they grouped back into their existing clusters, which had been forming and solidifying for months before Sora arrived, and Sora was left at the edges of those clusters, watching. She was good at watching. She had been good at it for as long as she could remember. Her parents had died when she was 3. The colony transport malfunction was 2 lines in a report filed somewhere. To Sora it was a gap in memory where the weight of being carried used to be. She remembered almost nothing of them, not faces, not voices, not the specific quality of being held, only the fact of it, an absence shaped like a presence, and the carved green stone her mother had always kept in her pocket, and that the transit officer at Kelmer Point had given to Sora when she arrived, saying only that it had been found with her. She had been in 2 facilities before Halcyon Bridge, one on the transit station at Kelmer Point, one on the colony settlement on Yarda 4 that had accepted her briefly, and then quietly returned her when the integration funding ran out. She had been in Halcyon Bridge for 4 months now. Kelmer Point had been a processing facility primarily, not designed for children, and the staff had been kind in the brisk, overextended way of people managing too many cases with too few resources. She had spent 6 weeks there before the placement to Yarda 4, in a room with 4 other children, all human, who had been pleasant enough. She had learned there that her thermoregulation made her a strange bed neighbor. She radiated warmth through the night, and the children had at first clustered near her and then, as the novelty wore off, requested to be moved. Yardafor had felt more like an attempt. It was a colony settlement with an established children's home that prided itself on its multi-species intake, and for the first 3 weeks, Sora had been cautiously hopeful in the way she had learned to be cautious about, because hope was something she had learned to carry in small measures, like water in a container with a small crack, useful if moved carefully, disastrous if jostled. The integration funding had come from a galactic colonial support grant that had been renewed twice before and was assumed to be renewable again. And then it wasn't, and the home had to reduce its non-standard species placements, and Sora was the non-standard species with the most recent intake date. The transit officer who brought her to Halcyon Bridge had been apologetic. She had said the word *temporary several times, in a way that Sora had understood, meant the officer hoped it was temporary rather than that anyone had promised it was. Halcyon Bridge was 4 months now, and temporary had begun to feel like another word for *permanent* spelled wrong. She understood, without anyone telling her directly, that she was difficult to place. She understood this because she was 7 and very observant, and because she had heard the word difficult used in conjunction with her file more than once, though always in hushed voices, and always while the speaker believed she was out of earshot. She had very good hearing. Varathkeln hearing was slightly sharper than human at most frequencies, and she had never told anyone this. She sat at the edge of the common room on a Wednesday evening in early October, and watched the other children play a card game she had never learned and did not ask to learn, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill she had cultivated carefully, because it was the only way to make the evenings pass without feeling like she was waiting for something that was not going to arrive. The first time she saw Declan Akafer, he was arguing about a waiver form. She was in the hallway outside Coordinator Harwick's office, sitting on the bench that was there for children waiting to be seen. She'd been sent to explain a minor incident involving a broken craft supply cabinet and a younger boy who had claimed she'd pushed it, which she had not, and the office door was ajar, and she could hear the conversation clearly. "I understand the waiting period," the man said. He had a low, even voice, not angry, precisely the opposite of angry, which was somehow more forceful. "I'm asking whether there's a parallel process, whether I can complete the home assessment concurrently with the 45-day review period rather than sequentially. Those are not the same thing." Coordinator Harwick said something about standard procedure. "I've read the standard procedure," the man said, still in that same even voice. "I'm asking about exceptions to it. The form itself cites exceptions." A pause. "I've highlighted the relevant section," the man said. Sora pulled her knees up to her chest and leaned slightly toward the gap in the door. She could see part of him, a shoulder, a forearm, a hand resting on the edge of the desk. He was a tall human man, broad through the shoulders, wearing a plain gray jacket. He had a folder open in front of him that appeared to be extensively annotated in the margins. "That process is rarely used," Coordinator Harwick said. "But it exists," the man said. Another pause. "I'll need to make some calls," Coordinator Harwick said. "I'll wait," the man said, and there was nothing impatient in it, only the simple statement of someone who had decided to be thorough. Sora heard the coordinator's chair push back. A moment later, Coordinator Harwick came out of the office, nearly walked past her, and then stopped. "Sora, I forgot you were out here. We'll talk about the cabinet later." She looked briefly distracted. "Go ahead back to the common room." Sora slid off the bench. She glanced once at the office door as she passed it, briefly, not obviously. The man had picked up his folder and was reviewing his own annotations, patient and methodical in the empty room. She went back to the common room. She thought about the highlighted section of the form for the rest of the evening. His name was Declan Okafor. She learned this from the sign-in log by the front desk 2 days later, when she was waiting for the weekly health check and bored enough to read things upside down. He had visited 3 times in the past 2 weeks. The log didn't note which children he'd expressed interest in, because it wasn't that kind of log. She did not let herself think about it. She was good at not letting herself think about things. She had a well-developed internal partition between the part of her mind that noticed things and the part that assigned them meaning, and she had learned to keep the partition mostly closed, because opening it when she was wrong about what something meant hurt more than not opening it at all. She had made that mistake at Yardafor, with a couple named the Havorsons who had come 3 Saturdays in a row and brought fruit from the colony market and asked her careful questions about what she liked to do and whether she'd ever seen the Eastern Desert and whether she could imagine living in a house with a garden. She had opened the partition on the 4th Saturday morning while she was waiting, and she had let herself think, "This is it. This is the one asterisk." She had eaten breakfast with the particular quiet attentiveness of someone who is trying not to disturb something fragile. They hadn't come that Saturday or the next. She had found out later, secondhand through the 2 thin walls of the coordinator's office, that their own child, biological, a late surprise, had been confirmed, and so they had withdrawn from the prospective list, which was the right decision for them and a reasonable decision, and still a thing she had pressed on too hard afterward, alone in her room, before she managed to close the partition again. She had kept it closed since then mostly. She had become very good at mostly. He came on a Saturday. Saturdays were visiting days at Halcyon Bridge, which meant families, prospective and established, were permitted to interact with the children in the common room and the small outdoor courtyard. Most of the children dressed slightly nicer on Saturdays. Most of them drifted, by some animal instinct, toward the high-traffic areas of the room where they were most likely to be seen. Sora sat by the window with a book about migratory bird patterns on the northern continents of Earth, which she had read 3 times already, but had checked out again, because she liked the diagrams. She was aware of the man when he came in. She was aware of Coordinator Harwick saying something to him by the door, and gesturing in several directions, and the man nodding, and then slowly crossing the room. He stopped at the table to her left first, where 3 children were playing a board game. He watched for a moment. He said something that made one of them laugh. He moved on. He stopped at the art corner, where a boy named Theo was painting something large and orange. He looked at the painting with what appeared to be genuine attention. He asked a question. Theo explained at length. The man listened. He was making his way through the room in a way that did not look like searching, but was. Sora turned a page. The diagram was of Arctic tern migration paths, which were extraordinary distances that staggered her each time she looked at them, more than 70,000 kilometers in a single year, from one pole to another and back. She thought about what it must mean to have a direction built into you so deeply that you crossed an entire planet to follow it. "What's that about?" She looked up. The man, Declan Okafor, was standing to her side, not too close, looking at the book from a respectful angle rather than leaning over her. He was older than she'd estimated from the doorway. Mid-40s, maybe. He had a face that had weathered some things and kind eyes, and he had asked the question with the same low, even voice she'd heard through the office door, the voice that was not performing warmth but simply had it. She showed him the cover. "Birds," he said. "Migratory birds," she said. "These ones fly from the Arctic to the Antarctic every year, both ways." "That's," he paused, doing what appeared to be a genuine calculation. "That's an enormous distance." 70,000 kilometers, she said. "More or less. And they come back. Every year." He looked at the diagram for a moment, in the same way he'd looked at Theo's painting. like he was actually seeing it. "Do you know why?" he asked. She considered the question. Most adults didn't ask follow-up questions. They asked the first question, got an answer, said that's interesting or very smart, and moved on. "Food," she said, "and light. The Arctic summer has 24-hour daylight, the Antarctic summer too. They're always chasing the best season." "So they're never really somewhere wrong," he said. "They're always exactly where the season is." She looked at him. "Approximately," she said after a moment. He smiled, not the wide, performative smile that adults sometimes produced for children, but a smaller, more specific one. "I'm Declan," he said. "Sora," she said. He didn't react to her name or her appearance in any of the ways people sometimes did. He didn't pause. He didn't smile wider in that careful way that meant, "I am being very good about this asterisk." He just nodded, like her name was a name. "Do you want to keep reading?" he asked. "I don't want to interrupt." She looked at the book. She looked at him. "I've read it before," she said. "You can sit down if you want." He sat down across from her, and she told him about Arctic terns. He came back the next Saturday. She was at the same table. She had not planned to be at the same table. She had simply ended up there. He sat down across from her, and this time he had questions, actual questions, not polite ones. He had looked up Arctic terns, he said, after they'd spoken. He wanted to know whether the navigation was magnetic or celestial or something else. "Both," she said. "Probably several other things too. They're not sure. They use star patterns and the Earth's magnetic field and the position of the sun and possibly smells. It's redundant navigation." "Redundant like backup systems," he said. "Redundant like they can't afford to get lost," she said. He was quiet for a moment, considering this. "Have you read anything on animal navigation in general, or just migration?" "Mostly migration," she said. "Some on echolocation, but that's different." "There's a good book on deep ocean currents," he said. "It's not about animals, but it's about systems that move things across enormous distances. It's a bit dense in the middle section, but the first and last thirds are—" He paused. "I can bring it next time if you want. Or not. It's just in case." "Okay," she said. "Okay, you want it, or okay, it's just in case." She considered. "Okay, you can bring it." He nodded, and they sat for a while in the comfortable quiet of people who do not need to fill all the space. And the one after that. The third Saturday, he brought the book, not for her specifically, he was careful to say, just something he'd picked up at a second-hand shop and thought might be interesting. It was about deep ocean currents and the way they moved heat around the planet, which was, he said, not entirely unlike migration but on a planetary scale. She read the introduction in front of him, her second eyelid blinking twice as she processed the opening argument. "Your analogy is imprecise," she said. "Migration is driven by biological imperative and external cues. Ocean currents are driven by density differentials and the Coriolis effect. The mechanisms are entirely different." "Fair," he said. "But the scale is comparable," she added after a moment. "I thought you'd say that," he said. She looked up at him. He looked back at her with the small, specific smile. "Not entirely wrong," she said. He accepted this with a nod. She kept the book. The fourth Saturday he brought nothing, only himself, and they talked for almost 2 hours. About the book, about a documentary on cephalopod intelligence that he had watched, and she had not, but that she asked enough questions about that they spent 40 minutes on it anyway. About the way the Halcyon Bridge kitchen made its Thursday soup that she ate because the nutritional profile was adequate, but that was, she would describe if pressed, aggressively beige in concept. He laughed at this, a real laugh, not a performance, and she found that it was a good sound and not frightening, which surprised her slightly, because she had not noticed until that moment how long she had been keeping herself at a slight remove from the laughter of adults, in the way that you protect a bruise by unconsciously adjusting your posture around it. The conversation happened on the fourth Saturday, and she heard it because she had very good hearing, and because she was in the hallway getting water from the fountain near the office, and the office door was not fully closed. "She's a wonderful child," Coordinator Harwick was saying. "Very bright, very self-contained." "I know," Declan said. "But I want to be honest with you." The coordinator's voice was careful. "Sora has a specific set of needs. Varathkelm development involves some particular nutritional requirements, and her thermoregulation is different from a human child's. She needs a cooler sleeping environment than most families would think to provide, which sounds minor but causes genuine discomfort if it's overlooked. There are other things too, cultural integration considerations. She'll likely need supplementary educational support because the standard curriculum wasn't designed with Varathkelm cognitive development patterns in mind. Not because she's slow, she's anything but because the sequencing doesn't always match." "I've been reading about it," Declan said. A pause. "The Varathkelm Colonial Integration Handbook," he said. "The third edition, which has more on pediatric development than the second, and the dietary guidelines from the Intercolonial Medical Registry. I also spoke with a physician at the Cross-Species Family Support Clinic on Farron Street. She was very helpful." Another pause longer. "We've had 11 inquiries about Sora over the past year," Coordinator Harwick said. 5 in-person visits. 3 of those families expressed strong interest. "What happened?" 2 withdrew after reading the care documentation. 1 went forward to the home study and then decided they weren't equipped for it. Declan didn't say anything. "I want to be certain," the coordinator said, "that you understand what you're committing to. It isn't just paperwork." "I know it isn't," he said. And then, after a beat, "I've been coming here for 6 weeks. I know which book she's read 3 times. I know she eats in a specific order and that she doesn't tell anyone why because she doesn't want the kitchen to make adjustments on her behalf because she's learned that asking for things doesn't work the way she hopes. I know she has very good hearing and that the bench outside this office is about 8 feet from the door. I know that she's waiting right now to find out what I'm going to say." Sora, standing at the water fountain, went very still. "She is," Coordinator Harwick said, after a moment, sounding as though she wasn't sure whether to be alarmed or moved. "Then I want her to hear this," Declan said. "I've done the reading, I've done the consultations. I've drafted a dietary and environmental plan with the physician on Farron Street, and I'm willing to have it reviewed by whoever the home assessor designates. I've applied for the concurrent review. I know that Sora has been returned twice and that her file uses the word *difficult*, which is a word that says more about the infrastructure than it does about the child." His voice was still even, still unhurried. "I want to adopt her. I have wanted to since the 3rd Saturday. I am asking you to tell me what I need to do next." Sora pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. The water fountain was still running. She reached over and turned it off. "Come back into the office, please," Coordinator Harwick said, and her voice had shifted slightly into something less careful and more real. "Let's talk through the process." She didn't say anything to Declan that Saturday, not about what she'd heard. He came out of the office 40 minutes later and found her in the common room, back at her window table, the Ocean Current book open in front of her. He sat down across from her. He didn't say anything either. After a while, he said, "Do you want to get something to eat? There's a place on Hadley Street that does a protein-first menu. They cater to a few different species. I thought we might try it." She looked at him. Protein first. He'd done the reading. "Okay," she said, and her voice was steadier than she expected it to be. The next 3 months were not simple. The home assessment required 2 visits, both scheduled and then 1 rescheduled when the assessor had a family emergency. There were forms. There were interviews, 1 with Declan alone, 1 with Sora alone, 1 with both of them together, 1 more with Declan that she wasn't present for but that she was told had gone well. There was a review period. There was a waiting period inside the review period. There was a secondary document review for cross-species placements that had been added to the process 2 years ago, and that nobody seemed to know very well, which meant it took longer than it should have. Declan drove to Halcyon Bridge on the Saturdays and on 2 Wednesday evenings when paperwork needed her signature or her input, and once when there was a meeting with a child development coordinator who specialized in Verathkeln integration. The coordinator, whose name was Dr. Yale Sund, was methodical and thorough and had clearly done this before. She tested Sara on several dimensions: cognitive sequencing, social reasoning, environmental preferences, and took detailed notes. Sara answered everything accurately and without embellishment. Dr. Sund said she was a pleasure to assess. After the 3rd Saturday visit in November, Sara told him about her second eyelid. Not why it was there or what it did biologically. She'd looked that up herself in the Integration Handbook, because it was the 3rd edition and had a section on pediatric physiology, but that she could blink it voluntarily, which she usually didn't because it startled people. "Can I see?" he asked. She blinked it, a slow lateral slide, translucent amber across her eye and back. He watched. His expression was the same one he used for the Arctic tern diagrams. "That's remarkable," he said. She decided then that she was going to be all right. She was still at Halcyon Bridge on the day the final approval came through. She was in the common room. Coordinator Harwick came to find her herself, which was unusual. "There's a call for you," she said. "In my office." Declan's voice on the call was calm, the way it always was, but underneath it was something she'd learned to recognize over 3 months of Saturdays, a quality of being precisely where he wanted to be. "It came through this morning," he said. "The final sign-off. I'm picking you up on Thursday if that works for the coordinator." "Thursday," Sara said. She looked at Coordinator Harwick, who nodded. "Thursday," she said. "Good," he said, and then, "I want you to know that I've been planning the room. The temperature's set 2 degrees cooler than a standard human bedroom, and there's a second thermostat so you can adjust it yourself. And I found a protein-first restaurant that delivers." She looked down at the desk. There was a pen there and a pad of paper with the Halcyon Bridge logo on it, and she looked at these things for a moment until she was certain her voice would come out right. "You read the handbook," she said. "The 3rd edition," he said. "The 3rd edition has an error in Chapter 7, she said. "The dietary conversion table. The grams are right, but the temperature recommendations for food service are listed in Celsius when they should be Fahrenheit for the standard human kitchen scale." A brief pause. "I'll make a note," he said, and she could hear the smaller, more specific smile in his voice. "I'll see you Thursday, Sara." "Thursday," she said. She went back to the common room after the call. She sat at her table by the window. Outside, the October sky had gone thin and pale, and the trees on the street below had shed most of their leaves, and the branches were bare and clear against the gray. She thought about Arctic terns, the way they were always exactly where the season was, the way the direction was built into them so deep it crossed a planet. She thought about Thursday. Thursday came cold and clear, with a hard early morning frost that glazed the courtyard stones and made the iron railing by the front steps look poured from glass. Sara packed her things the night before. It did not take long. She had 2 changes of clothes, the Ocean Current book, a small carved stone that had belonged to her mother, dark green, smooth on one side where hands had worn it, and a folded piece of paper that Theo had given her, which was a painting of something large and orange that he had described as a asterisk going away present asterisk, and which she suspected was meant to be her, or a bird, or possibly both. She sat on her bed in the gray pre-dawn light and held the stone. She had held it a great many mornings. She had held it on the transit station at Kelmer Point, and in the colony settlement, and in the 4 months here. The stone was the only thing that had been hers across all of it. She was aware of this as a fact, and she had learned not to press on it too much, because pressing on it opened the partition, and the partition opened onto things that were still very large. Coordinator Harwick brought breakfast to her room. This was unusual. Sara ate it methodically, protein first. "You'll do well," Coordinator Harwick said, sitting on the edge of the chair across from her. She had the look of someone who was choosing her words with care, which was how she usually looked, but there was something underneath it now that was less administrative. "You're a very perceptive child. That's going to serve you." Sara considered this. "It served me so far," she said, which was true enough. Coordinator Harwick made a sound that might have been a laugh. "He did his homework," she said after a moment. "Some of them don't, he did." "I know," Sara said. "Does that help?" Sara thought about it. About the third edition. About protein first asterisk. About the cooler room with the second thermostat she could adjust herself. The small, specific announcement that said he had not just read a list but understood what was underneath it. That she had spent 4 years in places where she adjusted herself to fit, and that he was making space shaped like her. "Yes," she said. He arrived at 9:45, which was early. Sara was in the entry hall with her bag, because she had been ready since 8:30 but had not wanted to appear to be waiting. She heard his footsteps on the steps and straightened slightly. The door opened. He came in wearing the gray jacket and carrying a second bag which turned out to contain, when he set it down and opened it, the following: a travel thermos of hot protein broth, Verathkelm formulated, per the label from the Farron Street Clinic. A small book about deep ocean thermal vents that he said was a sequel of sorts to the current book, and a flat, palm-sized piece of polished dark stone with a small iridescent seam running through it, which he held out without preamble. "I found that at a geological market on Aldera Street," he said. "The iridescence is labradorite. It reminded me of your cheekbones." She looked at the stone, she looked at him. "That's a strange thing to say," she said. "Probably," he said. She took the stone. It was cool and smooth, and the iridescent seam caught the entry hall light and shifted blue, then green, then a deep warm gold. She put it in her jacket pocket where it sat beside her mother's stone, and they were roughly the same size, and neither of them was the other but they fit. "Ready?" he asked. She picked up her bag. "Yes," she said. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on a quiet street that had a tree in front of it, old enough that the roots had buckled a section of the sidewalk, and the city had put a small metal plate over the worst of it rather than cut the root. Sara noticed this on the way in and thought it was a good sign, though she could not have said precisely why. The apartment was not large, but it was arranged with care, the kind of arrangement that has lived with itself long enough to know where things go. There was a kitchen that faced east, and a window seat in the main room that had a reading light on a flexible arm, and 3 shelves of books that were organized in a way she did not immediately understand, but that she suspected had a logic she would eventually discern. He showed her the room. It was a real room, not a partition, not an alcove, not a corner of a larger shared space. It had a window that looked out at the buckled sidewalk tree, and the walls were a deep blue-gray that she later learned he had repainted specifically. "I looked up Verathkelm dwelling colors," he'd said, "the visual preference studies from the colonial integration research. The original color was a pale cream." The thermostat was on the wall by the door. Below it was a second smaller one, at her height. She crossed the room and put her hand on the second thermostat. It was real. She stood there for a moment with her hand on it. "The bathroom has a separate temperature setting too," he said from the doorway, his voice even and unhurried. "There's a dial on the wall behind the door. The towels are yours, the blue ones. The shelf above them is yours." She turned around. He was leaning in the doorway, and he was watching her with the same expression he used for Arctic terns and labradorite and Theo's large orange painting, full attention, unperformed. "You can change things," he said. "If something doesn't work, tell me and we'll change it. This is your room." She had heard those words before in different places. This is your room. They had always felt provisional, like a loan at an interest rate that hadn't been stated yet. She looked at the thermostat. She looked at the walls the color of Varathkeln home stone. She looked at the window facing the tree with the protected root. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She unpacked her bag. The carved green stone went on the windowsill where the morning light would find it. The labradorite one went beside it. The ocean current book went on the small shelf he'd left empty along the wall, and the thermal vent book went next to it, and there was room for more. She stood back and looked at the shelf. There was room for more. She had not owned more than could fit in one bag for as long as she could clearly remember. She had never needed to think about where things would go because the container was always finite, and the contents were always managed accordingly. She looked at the empty space on the shelf, 3/4 of a shelf, solid wood, fixed to a wall in a room that was hers, and felt something she did not immediately have a name for. She would find the name for it later. She would look it up the same way she looked up everything she didn't yet have language for, methodically and without embarrassment, because not knowing what something was called was not the same as not knowing what it was. She sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was softer than the ones at Halcyon Bridge. The duvet was a deep navy blue, which she suspected had been chosen deliberately, and which she appreciated without saying so immediately. He knocked on the open door. "Lunch in about 15 minutes, he said, "unless you need longer." She looked around the room. 15 minutes is fine," she said. He nodded and disappeared back down the hall, and she listened to his footsteps in the kitchen, the familiar sound of them. She had learned his footstep cadence over 3 months of Saturdays, the particular rhythm of a tall man in no hurry, and it was strange and not strange to hear them here, in a space that was now also hers. She stayed on the edge of the bed for a moment. She put her hands in her lap and looked out the window at the buckled sidewalk tree, which was bare in November but was, she knew, not dead, only resting, saving everything it had for the spring, which would come on its own schedule in its own time, as spring always did. She had learned to be patient. She was still learning what to do when the thing she'd been patient about arrived. The first month was not simple, because first months aren't. She learned his rhythms and he learned hers, and there were adjustments on both sides, and some of them were easy and some required patience. She was very quiet in the mornings. Not sad, just quiet. Varathkeln physiology involved a longer transition out of sleep than humans typically experienced, a gradual warming of both body and cognition, and she needed about 20 minutes of simply existing before she was ready to be in conversation. He figured this out by the third morning without being told, and adjusted his own morning accordingly. Coffee for him, the protein broth she liked warmed in a small pot, and 20 minutes of parallel quiet, each of them in the kitchen doing their own thing, before the day properly started. She didn't know, the first time she came down to find him doing this, reading at the kitchen table, the broth already warm, the 20 minutes already accounted for, what to do with the feeling it produced. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. He looked up. "Morning," he said, and went back to his book. She sat down. She warmed her hands on the broth. "Morning asterisk," she thought, and the word felt different than it usually did. There were other small adjustments, and she cataloged them not because she was auditing, but because she was, at her core, a person who noticed things and found comfort in the evidence of being noticed back. The kitchen cabinet where her dietary supplements were kept, the ones from the Farron Street Clinic, Varathkeln formulated, was at the height she could reach without a step stool. She had not asked for this. He had simply put them there. The light in the bathroom was adjustable, which she would not have thought to ask for, and which she discovered on the second night when she reached automatically for a switch and found a dial instead. Varathkeln eyes in low-light conditions needed a longer adjustment period than human ones, and blasting bright light in the middle of the night was uncomfortable in a way she had always just absorbed as a cost of living in human-designed spaces. She stood there with her hand on the dial, adjusting it to the low end, and felt the relief of it in a way that was disproportionate to the thing itself, which was, she recognized, because it wasn't about the light. It was about the fact that someone had thought about the light. He made mistakes too, because he was not a database but a person. He bought a kind of tea that turned out to be one Varathkeln adults used medically, and that children found deeply unpleasant, which she discovered on a Sunday afternoon and communicated by making a face she had not intended to make but was unable to prevent. He looked at the tea and looked at her face and said, "That bad?" And she said, "Yes, actually," and he threw the whole box away immediately without making it a situation which she appreciated. He had bought coffee the next day and asked if there was a kind of herbal tea she did like, and she told him about the pale gold one that tasted like warm grain, which was what her mother had made for her in the fragments of memory she still had, though she did not say that last part. He found the pale gold tea at the market on Hadley Street 2 days later. He put it in the cabinet she could reach. She did not say thank you for this specifically. She said it generally one evening over dinner, unprompted, which was not something she usually did with unprompted things. She said, "I know that it's a lot, the reading and the adjustments. I know it's more than most people would do." He looked at her across the table. He had a way of listening that was very complete, not performing attention but simply having it, the way the window had the tree. "It's not more than most people would do," he said. "It's what you do when someone matters." She looked at her dinner plate for a moment. "Okay," she said, and went back to eating. She did not open the partition. She simply let the thing he'd said sit in the room with them, taking up space, which it continued to do long after dinner was done. She started school in January, after the winter break. The school was a cross-species enrollment program, one of 3 in the city, recommended by Dr. Yale Sund. The curriculum was adapted for multiple developmental templates, which meant the sequencing was better matched to how she actually processed information, and the teachers had training in species-variant learning patterns, which meant she did not spend the first month translating the lesson structure into her own cognitive framework before she could engage with the content. She was ahead in several areas and behind in one, which was the human social norms module, because it was the one domain where she had the most to learn and the least prior experience. She was not behind because she was slow. She was behind because the module covered things she had not had regular, consistent access to, being known by the same people over time, the accumulating shorthand of an ongoing relationship, the way trust built not through single moments but through the slow aggregation of ordinary ones. There was a girl in her class named Petra who was human and small, and had the quality of someone who found most other children baffling and preferred the company of information. Petra sat next to Sara in the first week by accident and then by choice in the second week. And by the third week, she had declared without particular ceremony that Sara was her best friend and did Sara want to see the book she was reading about geothermal vents. Sara thought this was the most efficient social process she had ever observed. "Yes," she said. "It's quite technical in parts," Petra said, which Sara understood to be not a warning but a recommendation. "I know," Sara said. "I have a book about ocean thermal currents." Petra looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who has found exactly the right thing in an unexpected place. "We should swap," she said. They swapped. It was, as it turned out, the easiest friendship Sara had ever had, because it operated on the same principle as the Antarctic turn. The direction was built in, the navigation was multiple and redundant, and neither of them needed to explain to the other why they found density differentials interesting. She still worked on the social norms module. She was behind in it, and she intended to close the gap, because she was the kind of person who closed gaps carefully, methodically, without fuss. She made notes. She observed. She practiced, which was harder, because observation came naturally to her and practice required doing instead of watching, and doing left her more exposed. But she practiced. In February, she asked him why he hadn't adopted before. She had been wondering for weeks. She had a sense of the shape of him, the care, the preparation, the even voice that was not performing steadiness but simply had it. And she had been trying to understand where it had come from, because things like that didn't come from nowhere. He was in the kitchen making dinner. She was at the counter doing the assignment she was currently behind on, which was a short paper about human family structure and its cultural variations. He didn't answer immediately. He kept chopping. "I was with someone," he said after a while. "For a long time. We thought we'd have children of our own, and then we found out we couldn't, and then it took us a while to figure out what we wanted to do instead. And by the time we figured it out, there were other things." He paused. "She passed away 4 years ago." Sara put her pen down. "I'm sorry," she said. "Thank you," he said. He scraped the chopped vegetables into the pan and the kitchen filled with the smell of them in the hot oil. "I thought about it again last year, coming back to it. I'd done some research and then I looked at the registry and I ended up on the Halcyon Bridge page. I saw the file." He didn't say your file asterisk. He said the file asterisk, which was, she thought, a careful kindness. "I read it twice." She thought about the file. She had read it too. Once she'd asked Coordinator Harwick to show her, because she wanted to know what it said, and Coordinator Harwick had shown her, though with some hesitation. The file used the word asterisk difficult twice, and the phrase asterisk integration challenges 3 times, and contained 11 inquiry records, including the 3 that had gone forward and not worked out. "The file uses the word asterisk difficult asterisk," she said. "I know," he said. "I thought that was a strange word for a child who'd been in 3 facilities in 4 years and had never once, according to any of the notes, made trouble or been unkind." He turned to look at her from the stove. "The word the file should have used," he said, "is patient asterisk." Sara looked at her assignment paper. Patient, she had not thought of it that way. She had thought of it as survival, a technique, not a quality. Something she'd done because she'd had to, not something she'd had. "I ate dinner," she said, which was not what she meant to say, and he seemed to understand that. "It's almost ready," he said, and turned back to the stove. Spring came in stages, the way it does in the northern cities, incrementally. 2 warm days and then a cold snap and then 3 warm days. The trees on the buckled sidewalk street going from bare to a faint green haze to full leaf so gradually, she almost missed the moment when it happened. She did not miss it. She had been watching the tree since February, tracking it, because she had come to understand that the direction was the thing, the slow, unignorable turning toward light. The turn that flew 70,000 kilometers because it was built to know where the season was. The current that carried warmth across an entire ocean basin, because the planet required it to. She was at the window on the morning she decided to tell him. He was in the kitchen. She could hear the sounds of it, the coffee, the broth warming, the familiar rhythm of the morning. She had been thinking about her mother's stone on the windowsill, about the way she had carried it from the transit station to the colony settlement to Halcyon Bridge to here, how it had been the fixed point across all of it, the one thing that had stayed. She had been thinking about the labradorite stone beside it, and how it had not been hers at first and now was, in the way that things become yours, not by being given but by accumulating the small weight of days. She went to the kitchen doorway. He was at the table, book open, the 20 minutes still running. She waited until he looked up. "I want to call you something," she said. He closed the book. "I haven't before," she said, "because I wasn't sure. I'm sure now." He was very still, in the way he was sometimes when something mattered. "Okay," he said. She had thought about this. She had read the human family structure paper, and she had read additional material beyond the assignment, and she had understood the range. How it varied by culture, by preference, by the relationship itself. How there was no single word but a family of words, and she could choose the one that fit. "Dad," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the tree was fully in leaf now, green and whole in the morning light. "Yeah," he said, and his voice was even, as it always was, but underneath it was something that was not even at all, something with a great deal of room in it, the way something can hold more than it appears to from the outside. "Yeah, okay." She went to the table. She sat down across from him. She wrapped her hands around the broth and felt it warm her palms. Outside, the tree moved in the early wind, and the light came through it in pieces, and the morning was entirely ordinary and entirely sufficient, and she thought, this is where the season is. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. And